morning, everyone. Right, there it is, summer. Summer. What do we think about summer? That. Bring it on. We deserve it, don't we? It's been a long, hard winter. This is how we picture summer, sitting behind barbecue, firing up, having a drink, talking to friends. Get them on. Get them on. But this is our reality. Met offers last year. We'll read cool and times unsettled. Wet theme much of April. June, almost complete absence of warm settled spells. And finally July, a similar type of thing. We had that nice little peak there during the Olympics. The only really good sunny spell for the whole of last year. But yet we kept the same shoes. Jubilee, joy, wasn't it? And the reality of our summer is that. The rain, shoe, shoe, shoe. Sun comes out, and we all feel we have to wear these shoes. Okay, so we're looking at the foot. And it's housed in that environment, so let's talk about the foot a little bit in mechanics and gait. The foot's a marvel of engineering. 26 bones, 2 sesamoids, 107 ligaments, 19 muscles, 33 joints, and it all stops us falling flat on our faces. So let's have a little look at the gait cycle, just to remind us of the terminology. Generally in practice these days we're using kinematic and kinetic assessments. Kinematics is pretty much what we do in our everyday practice. It's a description of motion. We video a lot and look at how much they're pronating or supinating or what their movement is. Whereas kinetics is looking at the overall forces that produce that type of movement. And you're getting this a lot more common now with pressure platforms, not becoming the norm, but are being used a lot more. And just a reminder of what the gait cycle is, it's the time interval between 2 successive occurrences of the same foot. For example, right foot to right foot again, just a reminder. So if we go over the gait cycle again, this is from Whittle, I believe. We're starting at the top here with initial contact as we're loading. We're going to talk about the terminal swing phase a little bit later on. But as it goes through, we have the loading response going into mid stance when the opposite toe comes off, and then moving into terminal stance and pre-swing. I prefer to call this active propulsion and this passive propulsion. It's a little bit easier to visualize, and it has more effect when we come to talk about the shoes. So when we look at force time graphs, now we're looking at more of the analysis through kinematic analysis, beg your pardon. And here we have a typical force time graph. Looks like a camel hump. And I'll just talk you through how that all works. So at the bottom over here is where we have our initial loading, and we're making contact with the floor. We're obviously going through a deceleration phase where we're applying the load onto the mat. So what happens is the mat will then pick up that particular force and it will increase as we start to load through. But if we go back a slide, we see here the knee bending a little bit, coming into the end of the loading response. And that's all occurring to get the foot flat on the ground until eventually we reach our peak of loading at contact. Then what happens is that as the knees come from a bent position, it starts to straighten, we lift up. Much like driving your car over the top of a hill, you get elevated, you feel like you're coming off your seat. That's when you start to see the pressure drop and that force drop down. And then we start to push up against the mat for propulsion. So this is going back into propulsion, and then we go through and it's falling off the edge. Where it crosses over, that is the passive propulsion phase. So that's when we're having initial contact of the opposite foot. And that marks the end of active propulsion and the beginning of passive propulsion. And that's really quite important in podiatric terms or gait analysis terms, is looking at the timings of gait. It's really quite important, especially when it comes to heel lift. We don't want to have something that's too prolonged. That can be pathological, or what I find is sometimes very early. So they pop the heel very, very early, and which will mean that their active propulsion phase is very long. And again, we'll talk about that with respect to shoes. So here's a typical presentation. This is my foot. Here we've got the heel contact down here, and yet with my left foot over here, I've therefore entered the passive propulsion phase. I'm moving my weight onto the opposite side. And you can see that by the graph over here that the contact has already started, therefore the passive propulsion period has actually started. This is a presentation in pathology. You can see we've lost our camel hump appearance for the graph. It's much more of a tabletop appearance. And you can see with here, we're in the passive propulsion period, but we've still got that heel on the ground. So you can see the stride length and step length is pretty short over here, and this person was in a lot of trouble. Very antalgic gait pattern. So the phases of interest that we're really looking at is loading response to heel lift. That's where we're going to be looking for pathology occurring. And in that, we're going to talk about terminal swing, and I'll talk to you the relevance of that in a second. Initial contact, going into foot flat, and then mid-stance, where we'll talk about the reverse windlass. And in propulsion, we're going to talk about the windlass, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, but I'll remind you about that in a second. So with terminal swing, what we're doing is we're preparing that foot for contact. We want to get it set up in the best possible way. And then at that point, you've got your tibialis anterior muscle active at this particular point, which creates an inverted position of the foot generally. So we usually find that our wear pattern for the shoe is on the outer border of the heel. And then in the majority of cases, you're going to find people getting referred to you to say that's a pathological gait pattern because the shoe wear is too much on the outside. Well, actually, initial contact, you would want that. That's a positive, not a central one. That's not such a great one. That's an 11-year-old. He hasn't got a fixed valgus deformity of the heel, but he's striking the ground centrally or medially. He's got prolonged activation of his peroneals in the terminal swing phase, and once he's set up like that, it's a bit of a disaster. So we're looking at initial contact. Our foot's hit the ground at an inverted position, and then we get the internal rotation of the tibia, translates into adduction and plantar flexion of the talus, and we get our natural loading response. We're also looking at going into foot flat. We want to control that as much as possible. And one of the key things you can start to look at, especially towards the end of the day, is audible slap. I don't mean foot drop slap, I just mean people getting tired. You can hear it, or they're just not controlling that movement, and that's a full chain issue. So we're looking at tibialis posterior is working eccentrically to decelerate this movement. And in the past, we've just said, oh, it's subtalar joint, subtalar joint, subtalar joint. I really wanted today to point out that we mustn't just focus on the subtalar joint, which podiatrists have been doing for years. We want to look at all the joints. The ankle joint, I mean, recent research has indicated that there's quite a lot of movement in the frontal plane and the ankle joint as well. We want to be looking at the talonavicular joint. We want to be looking at the lateral column. There's a lot of movement around there, so we want to look at both sides of the foot and try and ascertain what kind of loading pattern that individual is going to have. So when we're looking at the lateral column, what I sometimes find is that once they've loaded the outside of their foot, their lateral column runs out of range, and that becomes an increased pronation moment on the foot, or they're very mobile in that section. So you just need to have a look at it and make an assessment from there. But really, just note there's a movement in multiple joints, not just the subtalar joint, which is what we've been talking about in the past. So just a reminder about the windlass. Hicks in 1954 came up with this. It's used a lot, and you'll find a lot of running shops will use it as a buzzword. There's some, I believe, some running shoes which are, certainly in the 80s, they tried to do a kinetic wedge to facilitate this, and then more recently, some, I think Nike and New Balance, can't really remember, Nike and New Balance did a windlass facilitating shoe. So with the windlass, we're basically looking at a truss with the calcaneus and the metatarsals, and when you wind up the big toe, the plantar fascia pulls the heel towards the forefoot and therefore locking the foot up. And this, I don't really like the picture, I don't really like it in this particular sense. I prefer it if it was more in a push-off type of phase. But it tightens right up, locks the foot up, inversion of the calcaneus, and obviously that works with tib post as well, doing its fair share. So there it is again, dorsiflexion of the hallux creates the tying in of the foot, if you like, and the arch raise, which is really what we want to try and facilitate to create a stable platform off which you can push off. But let's get back a little bit to talk about the reverse windlass. I want to just explain the windlass first, now we talk about the reverse windlass. When we're in mid-stance and we're loading that foot right up, we're going to get elongation of the arch and a stretching of the fascia through here. And the idea is that part of what that does is it plantar flexes the digits in readiness for propulsion, so they've got a stable platform to push off. That's the theory. I found that it sometimes occurs, or it doesn't occur before the heel actually lifts, so we don't really get those toes, and it's very much an individual variation. But we're going to be doing some work on that, so we'll have to keep you posted in the future. And also, just by that stretching to a certain degree, we'll eventually create a degree of compression. Not a huge amount, but a degree of compression. So we don't really want that reverse windlass to go on too long. When we get into the active propulsion, we get the next effect, which is the locking wedge and truss effect. And basically what that means is that when you take two forces, let's say I take them, the classic one is you're taking a group of library books or a bunch of library books and you squeeze them together and you apply load, it takes a lot of force to keep them up. An easy way of doing that is just to tilt them upside down so you're holding it. So you've got gravity pushing down, ground reaction force pushing up, and you're getting compression with the library books. The same thing with the bones of the foot. As we go up into heel lift, we're getting gravity pushing down, ground reaction force coming up, compressing the foot together, and that makes it a more stable environment. Now, I'm doing some work on hypermobile children, and what I found is that hypermobile children will activate their active propulsion much earlier. So they usually pop their heel very, very early to try and establish this. They're trying to decrease their reverse windlass, increase their windlass, and increase this compression. It makes it much easier. Some of them, which I'm sure all of you have seen in your practice, tiptoe walk. Now the question is, they're tiptoe walking because their calves are tight, right? No, their calves are tight because they're tiptoe walking. So it's more their compensatory mechanism. The tissue will then respond around it. Okay, so have a look at it that way. When you see the kids, look and see how mobile their foot is. They're trying to get away from this foot, which is moving too much. So there's a reminder again about the windlass. We've got a nice stable arch through here. We're getting the compression and the bringing together of the calcaneus and the forefoot, locking the foot up nicely together, and pops into that. There we go. So how many of you have heard, or how many of you feel better in a heel than a dead flat? No? Everyone likes flats, eh? Okay. A lot of times you'll find out your patients, obviously mostly the female variety, will say they're far more comfortable in a heel. And we go, oh, heels are really bad, heels are really bad. Well, are they? I mean, if you think about what that heel's doing, I mean, yes, this is a bit extreme. It's not going to be particularly pleasant down there, but the windlass is aided with a heel, and we're getting the locking wedge and truss effect. So we're getting that stabilization. But there's individual postural changes we can affect. One might be a little bit unstable, proprioceptively might not be that great, and therefore that shoe for that particular person isn't ideal. What their metatarsal parabola is like, how they're loading their forefoot, what that's going to be like. And then the big factor is time. With a lot of this stuff, it's duration of load. So are these shoes bad, heels? No. But if you wear them constantly and you're predisposed, then it becomes probably more of a negative. So again, a reminder, there's our windlass. But what happens when it goes drastically wrong? This is a typical acquired pes planus, or in a hypermobile foot, you might find this, where you're having elongation of the fascia as we're getting into propulsion. We're going to have an increase in stress and strain through that particular area. It's far more difficult to to generate the power. And then what happens is we start getting the classic degeneration in the first MTP with the dorsal lipping, and we get the IPJ callosity on the bottom. A lot of you have seen that hyperextended distal phalanx, and this might be occurring during that time. And here's a classic picture of it. You see that? 15-year-old. Heel just popping up there, hypermobile foot, and there's the hyperextension. There you can see it all jamming in through there. And it's this almost a hallux flexus type of gait. Not going to be helped in that kind of a shoe. Seriously not going to be helped in that shoe. So basically, what we're looking at is anything outside or inside of the foot which is going to limit its ability to attenuate load. That's the job of the foot. It's got to accept load, return energy, and make our gait as efficient and functional as possible for that individual. Everything is subject specific. There isn't a blanket thing you can put on everyone. You need to look at every individual case separately to see what's going to be beneficial for that individual or not. And again, this concept of time. I mean, the end of the summer, you'll find sometimes plantar fascial cases are going to be on the up because they spent the entire summer in their flip-flops or their sandals or their Vibram 5 fingers or whatever it is that they're going to be wearing for an extended period of time. Or they go for a longer walk, increase in activity in that unstable environment. The tissue just cannot cope. Tissue stress model, that's basically what this is all about, and the tissue will then break down. So in summary, footwear choice is completely subject and pathology specific. You cannot say to someone a high heel's bad for you or dead flat's bad for you, because some people spend their entire lives in these particular shoes and they're absolutely fine. In South Africa, a lot of the kids don't wear shoes until they're 14 or 15. A lot of them play rugby. I played rugby against people without shoes. We had boots on and they were barefoot. It's nuts. So assess the role of the shoe in the onset of the injury, but also ascertain the load and use of appropriate footwear in the treatment of pathology. You can always pitch the shoe, change the heel height, get them to do something just to offload that tissue. So think about all of those things. Just think about the windlass type of thing, the locking and stability of the foot, and how you can offload the tissue. They've come in with the issue, find out where that tissue's been stressed, offload it as best you can, but utilize everything. Nothing's wrong, it's just you want to combine as much as you can together. And stress the importance of time and duration. A lot of times I get people are prescribed orthoses for, they come back in the office and they say, oh, you know, I'm not really getting any better. I said, well, how much time do you spend at home? Oh, yeah, 5 days out of thing, or what do you wear? Nothing. So they're barefoot at home, hard floors, and they expect to be better just because they wear their insoles outside or they're wearing their shoes outside. And of course, they're not doing your exercises either. And that's it. Thank you very much.